is NBC Palm Springs.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Daytona Everett. Coronavirus continues to dominate headlines today. Talk about testing and turnaround time from the nation's top health officials. This as the CARES Act and all the federal help for unemployment is set to expire. We'll have the latest on a possible replacement bill that the Democrats and Republicans have been arguing about for weeks, but we'll start here in Riverside County where a new mask campaign has been launched. The county is on a mission to deliver 10 million masks in 30 days. Officials kicked off the Masks Are Medicine campaign this week, and so far it's covered a lot of ground. Our Nico Payne shows us how it all works.
10 million masks may sound like a lot, but when facing a pandemic, unlike anything we have gone up against before, county leaders say they expect these masks to go quickly.
Riverside County has introduced the Masks Are Medicine campaign to try and slow the transmission of COVID-19. The county plans to donate 10 million masks countywide over the next 30 days.
And hoping that by doing this over the next 30 days, we can flatten the numbers and even in some cases lower the numbers on the trends that we're seeing right now.
As Riverside County remains on the state's coronavirus watch list, county leadership hopes this initiative will help with their COVID-19 response.
The pledge says that the person who takes the mask pledges to wear it as part of their program to try and fight COVID and encourage other people to do it as well.
10 million masks may seem like a lot, but county officials expect to disperse the masks relatively quickly.
We test between 3,000 and 4,000 people a day at our test sites in the county. We'll be delivering or giving out masks to everybody who gets tested.
They will also be distributed through community partners like Fine Food Bank, who help at-risk populations.
Because we already have a very wide distribution of food networks into, the most heavily and severely impacted communities and food deserts out in Riverside, eastern Riverside area, we have the ability to also send out with food these masks.
Funding for this project comes from the federal CARES Act, and the county says they hope this campaign will prevent any more mandatory orders in the future.
For $2 million, we got the 10 million masks. We're hoping, like I said, that the 10 million mask giveaway is at least a jumping point to maybe slowing that spread and slowing the numbers down, so that mandatory mask for the county won't be needed.
County officials also distributed over 50,000 masks to local nonprofit organizations who will be helping to hand out these masks for those who cannot make it into a testing site. Reporting in studio, I'm Nico Payne.
All right, thank you, Nico. Let's take a look at the latest COVID-19 numbers from Riverside County and the entire Coachella Valley. The county has stopped updating numbers on weekends, so these are as of Friday. Over 33,000 cases in Riverside County, over 9,000 of those in the Coachella Valley, 637 deaths in the county, 196 from the Coachella Valley. Riverside County Supervisor Karen Spiegel tests positive for coronavirus. In a newsletter, Spiegel said she got sick even though she limited her time outside her home and restricted her exposure to the outside world. In April, Spiegel was one of 2 supervisors on the board who proposed ending county requirements on social distancing and the use of face coverings. Now she's saying no one is immune to the virus and people need to take proper precautions. The official overseeing coronavirus testing says turnaround times for results are still too long. Admiral Brett Giroir is the Assistant Secretary for Health at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He says test result turnarounds are slower than what he'd like to see.
I started out by saying that we are never going to be happy with testing until we get turnaround times within 24 hours, and I would be happy with point-of-care testing everywhere. We are not there yet. We are doing everything we can to do that. What can we do? We can test everybody in a hospital within 24 hours so they can get the new treatments that we developed.
Multiple states dealing with high caseloads and some labs and public health departments report that turnaround times for diagnostic testing have slowed. The director of the National Institutes of Health says slowed turnaround times undercuts the value of the testing. More than 500 top health experts are calling for another national closure in a letter sent to the Trump administration. In the letter, they say we need bold action now to save lives. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going through that same cycle over and over again. Dr. Fauci spoke in response to this about the possibility of shutting down the country again.
You don't necessarily have to go all the way back to a complete shutdown, but you certainly have to call a pause and maybe even a backing up a bit.
These comments as coronavirus numbers continue to surge in the U.S., with the nation's daily death toll topping 1,000 for 4 days straight. As government benefits to protect Americans impacted by the pandemic start to run out, Democrats say they're waiting for a new GOP plan for Congress to pass. NBC's Jennifer Johnson has details.
In Washington, Democrats say they've had a bill on hold since mid-May to help struggling Americans, but are awaiting a counter-proposal from the White House and Republicans.
We have been ready for 2 months and 10 days. I've been here all weekend hoping they had something to give us. They promised it this week. It didn't come.
A federal ban on evictions has just run out. Federal pandemic unemployment compensation benefits expire Friday, and the payroll protection program for businesses ends early next month. The Trump administration defends the delay.
We want to make sure with the expiring unemployment insurance, we have the technical fix so people don't get paid more to stay home than they do to work. And we can move very quickly with the Democrats on these issues.
White House officials say the GOP's plan will be unveiled Monday and are hopeful Congress will move fast in passing this latest economic relief bill. Jennifer Johnson, NBC News, Washington.
And as discussions over small business relief continues, several local companies say it's too late. Muscle Works in Palm Desert officially shut its doors this past week. The owners of the gym say even with eviction moratoriums in place, they're unable to pay rent on the back end. The Greater Coachella Valley Chamber of Commerce says these closures affect more than just a single company.
We know that money that is spent locally on small businesses, that money tends to stay within the valley. It gets recirculated. As opposed to money that may go into national chains or big box, that money tends to leave the valley and we don't necessarily see it again.
The chamber is offering information on their website for struggling small businesses. The president says they're continuously applying for more financial aid.
Coronavirus coverage brought to you by East Valley COVID-19 testing site, serving residents of eastern Coachella Valley.
A Palm Springs brush fire that started early yesterday morning is now 211 acres and 50% contained. Fire crews will remain on scene to mop up any hot spots until 100% containment is reached, which is expected by the end of the day, according to the fire chief. One firefighter suffered a minor leg injury yesterday. No word yet on what exactly caused that fire. And fire crews are battling a brush fire in Europa Valley as well. The so-called Karen fire broke out yesterday, and as of this morning, it was 250 acres and 50% contained. No injuries have been reported and no word if any structures have been damaged in that blaze. All right, we're going to send things over to Chief Meteorologist Mike Everett for a look at your forecast. Hey, Mike.
Well, all good things must come to an end, and that cooling trend that we saw last week looks like it's going to be something that will move into our rearview mirror. High pressure building across the region this coming week will bring the H word back. In fact, we're going to be seeing temperatures that will bounce up into the 1-teens once again. I'll give you some details on that coming up as well. Long-term forecast models are suggesting that we could see an increase in humidity as monsoonal flow may come a little bit closer to us, but as it stands right now, we're not tracking any shower activity, just elevated moisture. I'll give you some details on that coming up as well. Next 3 days brought to you by Comfort Air show us getting into that 111 range on Monday, bouncing up into the 1-teens on Tuesday, making a slight pullback on Wednesday, but it looks like it gets hot again beyond that. I'll give you details and your full forecast coming up.
All right, thank you, Mike. The school year is quickly approaching, and the CDC is updating its guidelines, encouraging districts to come back in person. Kristen Dahlgren reports.
With just weeks to go until school begins, the CDC is laying out its guidelines, pressing districts to welcome students back in person, encouraging cloth face coverings, hand hygiene, and disinfecting often, spacing out students to maintain social distancing, even repurposing unused buildings or holding classes outside, keeping groups of students in cohorts or pods together throughout the day. The new guidelines address downsides of remote learning and benefits of in-person classes, adding COVID poses a relatively low risk to kids, but also noting 64 children in the U.S. have died since the pandemic began.
Teenagers and children aged sort of 10 to 19 seem to transmit the virus at least the same rate as adults. So there's nothing to suggest that children don't. Perhaps there's some evidence to suggest that the youngest children are less likely to transmit it.
The new guidelines come just weeks after President Trump urged the CDC to ease its preliminary recommendations, which he called too restrictive.
I'm so angry. If it's not safe enough for GOP delegates to be hundreds in the convention space, then how is it safe enough in Florida for children to be hundreds in a school?
This week, the president acknowledged some areas considered hotspots might have to delay reopening, while asking Congress to pass a relief bill with more than $100 billion for schools that do reopen.
If the school is closed, the money should follow the student.
While the decision to reopen is up to states and school districts, the decision on whether students go back will ultimately be up to parents. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News, New York.
Well, all local school districts will begin the school year virtually. Desert Sands, Palm Springs, and Coachella Valley Unified all adopted an online start to classes. They will eventually transition into a hybrid model when it's safe. Los Angeles and San Diego public schools will also start online. Officials say that both districts will continue planning for a return to in-person learning as soon as public health conditions allow, just like us here at home. They went on to say that teachers, parents, and students will all receive training to make online learning more effective. NBC's Lester Holt spoke with the superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District about the decision to keep classrooms closed and how they plan on keeping students on track.
Was this a tough call, or at the end of the day, did you look at the numbers and say we can't do it?
It's an incredibly tough call because we understand students need to be in school, but we can't compromise on the health and safety of all in the school community.
The CDC has come out with new guidance regarding schools and COVID. They lean heavily into the notion that kids need to be back in the classroom, that there are dangers to them if they don't get back in the classroom. Has any of what you've read caused you to rethink your position to do school online?
No, we all agree back in school as soon as possible. And if you look at what the CDC guidance says, the community has to be safe. You got to be within the boundaries of the World Health Organization guidelines to think about going back to school.
What's your level of concern that the kids right now who have been told they're going to be home indefinitely, that they won't be able to catch up?
We have great concern, which is why this fall, in addition to online learning, we're going to offer individual tutoring, both online and in person. We're going to do everything we can to try to help students catch up.
When the kids do come back, there's going to be a certain fear level. Not only for the kids, but the faculty.
Yeah, one thing that hasn't gotten enough attention is the mental health crisis that's coming with the education crisis. Students will bring the trauma back to school. Someone in the family might become sick or, God forbid, passed away. Someone might have lost their job. The mental health aspect of being back in school will be as great a challenge as the learning challenge being back in school.
That was Lester Holt reporting. Coming up after the break, Chicago's mayor shares strong thoughts about the possibility of federal troops being sent to her city, even going so far as to draw a line in the sand against the Trump administration. Plus, one airline will pay your medical bills if you contract coronavirus after flying. We'll tell you which one coming up.
Ahead for us, hurricane season has started. How will states battle coronavirus and storms? One state fighting both tonight. And as the school year approaches, more teachers are quitting or retiring early. Those stories and more on Nightly News.
Civil rights leader and U.S. Congressman John Lewis crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, one final time today. A horse-drawn hearse retraced the route of the 1965 march through the city, ending at the bridge where Lewis and other civil rights activists were beaten by state troopers on what's now known as Bloody Sunday. Lewis's body will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol tomorrow. A private funeral will take place on Thursday in Georgia, Atlanta's historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. And protests continue in Portland. They've been going on for over 2 months now. In this video, you can hear demonstrators chanting, "Feds go home." That's in response to federal officers being sent to the city by the Trump administration to protect federal property. The federal courthouse has incurred over $50,000 worth of damage from those protests. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot talks about the possibility of federal officers coming into her city. This past week, President Trump announced Operation Legend, which sends federal police to cities in America with violent crime problems. They've been already deployed to Portland, like you just saw in that video. Lightfoot said that she doesn't want the same thing to happen in her city.
I've drawn a very hard line. We will not allow federal troops in our city. We will not tolerate unnamed agents taking people off the street, violating their rights, and holding them in custody. That's not happening here in Chicago. So I've drawn a very, very bright line. I've made that very clear to every federal authority that I've spoken with, and they understand that if they cross that line, we will not hesitate to use every tool at our disposal to stop troops and unwanted agents in our city.
The idea of sending federal troops to Chicago comes after increased violent crime the past couple of weeks. Closer to home, a group of demonstrators took to Los Angeles city streets yesterday and even the freeway, stopping traffic. Organizers say the protest was in support of the ongoing movement in Portland, where federal troops are clashing with protesters. Similar rallies popped up in cities across the United States. All right, we're taking a live look now from our Walter Clark Highway 111 cam. Mike's got a look at your full forecast when we come back. All right, we're taking a couple live looks from our Agua Caliente casino cams. Beautiful, warm day out there in the desert. Let's head to the other end of the valley, the Palm Springs, the palm trees and the mountains. You can't beat it. All right, we're going to send it over to Mike Everett for a look at your forecast. Hey, Mike.
As I mentioned earlier, it was great while it lasted. We had that onshore flow that really kept temperatures regulated last week. But as we go into this new week, we are tracking a reversal. It looks like some high pressure will build across the region and take that flow back offshore again. It does a couple things for us. It's going to heat us up. We saw some of those numbers earlier. I'll show you the rest of the story coming up. It could also bring some more of that monsoonal flow a little bit closer to us. Doesn't look like it's going to materialize as any rain or storms as it stands right now, but it will elevate our humidity slightly. Of course, it's the time of year when we expect that, and we really have been blessed by not seeing a whole lot of that so far. We'll see where it takes us this week. Temperatures across North America will start the work week like this: 83 in Toronto, 96 in New York. You see some upper 80s and some very muggy, if not rainy conditions down towards Miami. Heating up in Phoenix, 108 is what we'll see, and up and down the West Coast is going to be warm as well. Portland's going to take a run at 100. When you've got some mid to upper 80s in Vancouver and Seattle, you know that we've got high pressure across the region. Here's what we're looking at tomorrow. We will do our very best to start in the upper 70s, and then we will warm well past that 30-year average. Remember, 108 is the norm for this time of year. Look for us to hit 111 in the afternoon, and you'll see those dew points getting into the lower 50s. 111 is where we'll top out in Palm Springs, 113 in parts south, 102 in Joshua Tree, and look for some mid to upper 70s in Big Bear, 99 in Cabazon. Your Comfort Air 7-day forecast shows heating headed our way this week. In fact, we'll get into that 1-teen range starting on Tuesday. Looks like we're going to stay there all week.
Well, if you contract COVID-19 during your trip, Emirates Airlines says they'll cover the medical expenses and quarantine costs. The airline is going to pay medical expenses up to $173,000 and quarantine costs of up to $160 for 14 days if the person tests positive while away from home. This will be available to all customers at no extra cost from now until October 31st. It's valid for 31 days from the moment they fly the first leg of their trip. Interesting right there. And Southwest Airlines says it's not going to furlough come October 1st. Restrictions attached to federal bailout money barred airlines from any furloughs or layoffs through September. Southwest says 17,000 of its workers have already taken voluntary separation packages and extended time off. Earlier this month, both United Airlines and American Airlines sent warnings of possible furloughs. When the lights went out on the concert business this spring, thousands of unused concert t-shirts sat in boxes, but a couple of well-known musicians are now helping find a use for them. As Steve Leisman reports, they're hoping to do their part to help stop the virus and get back to jamming on stage.
In a 50-year career, Bob Weir, founding member of the Grateful Dead, has battled crowds and police to get on stage.
Don't forget tornadoes.
But the coronavirus, which has shut down the concert industry, is one of his biggest obstacles yet.
I'm a guy who's spent his entire life lighting people up from my place on stage, and I can't do that now.
For the show to go on, Weir knows the virus has to get under control, so he's joined with other musicians in a unique project called Music for Masks to repurpose unused concert t-shirts into masks. When the lights went out on the concert industry, the musicians, the roadies, the guitars, and the amps were all stranded.
You have thousands of shirts, they're printed with tour dates that aren't going to happen.
Corn Blues Everywhere Apparel, which makes 100% recyclable tees, had the bright idea of turning them into masks, and Music for Masks was born.
We are mobilizing dead stock merchandise that could potentially become landfill waste to create masks and donate them to communities in need during the coronavirus pandemic.
The popular jam band Widespread Panic also donated shirts. For bassist Dave Schools, it's a matter of doing the right thing, but also a matter of economics.
There's so many more people than just the six of us on stage. I think after a while, it starts to be a pretty sizable chunk. A big economic stimulus.
Weir says wearing a mask is crucial to getting back to a place where crowds can enjoy the music again.
This is an impassioned plea to folks to come together and make it possible for me to get back out and light you up.
That was Steve Leisman reporting. Those actually look super cool and probably breathe really well. We'll be right back after the break. All right, thanks for joining us tonight. If you missed any of today's stories, you can see them on our website, NBCPalmSprings.com. You can see a QR code on our screen. You can scan that code, and it's going to take you to our website. Very nifty, very cool. Try it out. All right, we'll see you at 6.